Hello, welcome back to the OTHM Diploma Level 7 in Environmental and Sustainability Management. My name's Emma Honeyford. I'm not sure I went into detail previously on the first session, but my background is I have a degree in human geography, and I then went on to study a master's in environmental management and sustainable development, in which I've looked at past research has looked at recycling behaviour, especially looking at different factors for participation in recycling and environmental behaviour across Manchester in the UK. I've also looked at the role of education and childhood in the transition to a sustainable world. So currently I work as a sustainability consultant, particularly within arts and culture. Sorry. So yeah, that's a bit about me. So today we are going to continue the unit, which is environmental science and energy transition. So the learning outcome for today is to understand the physical principles of harvesting renewable alternatives to fossil fuels and the technological and market developments within this area. So I'm going to share the unit details again. So the learning outcome. So for this session today, we are going to cover learning outcome number 2. So this will all be around understanding the physical principles of harvesting renewable alternatives to fossil fuels and the technological and market developments within this area. So 2.1, so the learner will need to demonstrate that they have an understanding of how to explain the current technological trends, any market developments, and the physical principles of PV and concentrated solar power, 2 different types of solar power there. Oh goodness, sorry about that. Have a lamp on the run. 2.2 is to explain the technological trends, market developments, and physical principles of onshore and offshore wind harvesting. We have 2.3, explain the technological trends, market developments, and physical principles of hydroelectric power plants and wave and tidal energy harvesting. We've got 2.4, so you should have an understanding and an awareness of how to analyse the environmental impact of onshore and offshore wind harvesting, hydroelectric plants, wave and tidal energy harvesting. 2.5, analyse the physical principles of harvesting geothermal energy and contemporary technological trends. And 2.6, you'll have an understanding of how to evaluate how the natural settings of a given country region may support or hinder the use and development of renewable energy harvesting technologies. So the geography is very important when we look at considering which renewable energies we are going to use in per region. We need to have an understanding the role of energy generation in the transition to sustainability to become net zero for 2050 is really important. So this we will go over in detail of the science behind each renewable technology. So I'll go back onto the slides. Okay, so this is learning outcome 2, the indicative content. So we have different renewable alternatives to fossil fuels. So we know that previously in the previous session we spoke about the use of fossil fuels relies on carbon, stored carbon over time. So when we use fossil fuels, we're releasing a lot of excess carbon into the atmosphere, which in turn leads to more greenhouse gases, which leads to more the greenhouse warming and then perpetuates climate change, and it's very problematic, which is why we know the move to renewable away from fossil fuels is going to absolutely limit the impact of that, and will enable us hopefully to get to net zero carbon by 2050. So different types of renewable energies that we will go into today will be solar, wind and hydropower, geothermal. We will talk about the physical principles, the science behind the different renewable technologies. Each renewable energy will have an environmental impact, and it will look differently dependent on the geography again. The developments in harvesting technology. So what are the developments? Typically, relying on technology to solve the problems of climate change has been deemed as a weak form of sustainability, but we know that we are gonna absolutely have to rely on technology to drive the transformation for a sustainable world, and there are many benefits of it. So it's just understanding how to be agile and flexible with the different options that we do have, and having an awareness of the different factors, of the positives and the negatives of each renewable energy power option will be helpful. So the suitability of these technologies for a particular country or region will be different. There are geophysical requirements. So just to be aware, carbon accounting will be covered in more detail in Unit 6, Net Zero. So to understand the physical principles of harvesting renewable alternatives to fossil fuels and the technological and the market developments in this area. So when we look at renewable energy, the core idea is simple. So instead of burning fuel that releases stored carbon, which we do when we use fossil fuels, it makes much more sense for the planet. The planet is better off if we don't burn fossil fuels, and therefore tapping into natural energy flows that are constantly replenished is more of a sufficient, reliable energy source. So every renewable energy technology works different because of basic physical principles that convert natural forces such as sunlight, wind, heat, plant growth or water movement into usable energy without depleting a finite resource. So it's really important to understand that there is a history to all of this, and the role of engineering, cost and market maturity of all these technologies. The market has a massive role to play in the development of renewable technologies and their and how successful they will be. We are relying on market forces when it comes to renewable energy in a massive way. So yeah, we'll move on to the next section now. So we'll now talk about the physical principles behind major renewable technologies. So solar power, we're going to have a little discussion around that first of all. So solar technologies, the main idea of solar technology is that they draw on the physics of electromagnetic radiation and semiconductor behaviour. So there's, excuse me. So one type of solar power is PV. So the way that this works is that photons from sunlight hit a semiconductor material, usually made from silicon, freeing the electrons and generating direct current. So this is a photoelectric effect at work. Solar thermal. So with solar thermal, mirrors concentrate sunlight to produce heat, which then drives a turbine. This uses radiation reflection and thermodynamics. So the massive advantage of this type of renewable energy is that, from the sun, it's free, it's an unlimited resource, and it's there to be used. But there are many limitations of solar power as well, which we will go into later on. So the second type of renewable technology is wind power. So wind turbines rely on kinetic energy from moving air, The pressure differences in the atmosphere driven by solar heating cause wind. Turbines convert this kinetic energy into mechanical rotation, and generators then convert that electricity using electromagnetic induction. So the physics has always been the same since the beginning of this type of technology. The difference is over time is that the technology and the engineering has got better, and we're now able to build taller, stronger, and more efficient turbines. So that is one positive. And then we have hydropower. So hydropower uses gravitational potential energy. Water stored at height behind a dam or a natural flow falls or moves through turbines, spinning them. So fast-flowing water systems like river turbines and tidal systems work off predictable water movements driven by gravity, the Earth's rotation, and lunar cycles. So it's a predictable form of renewable energy, which means it can be better to plan for. And then you have biomass and bioenergy. So biomass uses chemical energy stored through photosynthesis. Plants absorb the light and convert it into chemical bonds. So when we burn biomass or process it into biogas or biofuels, that stored energy is then released. So the carbon emitted is theoretically reabsorbed by new plant growth, making it closer to carbon neutral if managed well. Okay, the next type is geothermal energy. So geothermal systems tap into thermal energy stored underground. By pumping water through these hot areas, we can create steam to drive turbines. This is a simple heat transfer and thermodynamics. And then we have wave and tidal energy. So these technologies convert the kinetic and potential energy of waves or tides into electricity. Tidal energy is especially reliable because it's driven by lunar gravitational forces. So I think it is worth mentioning as well that particularly in the UK at the moment, renewable energy supplied a larger share of any other source of energy. I think it's around 50% at the moment, but I will check the figures for that. So we are, there's a push throughout the UK at the moment to reach these ambitious targets. We are wanting to be carbon free by 2050 for the UK. So we know that the transition, the movement away from centralised fossil fuel systems to renewable energy sources is the way forward. So there have been technological developments in renewable energy. There's been massive improvements in efficiency, and this has impacted the development of different renewable forms of energy massively. So solar panel efficiency has doubled in the last 2 decades. So wind turbines have grown from 30 metre towers to over 200 metres, capturing more energy due to higher wind speeds at altitude. So this is good news, and hopefully this will get even better as time goes on over time. So energy storage systems like lithium-ion batteries have also improved dramatically. So technology is getting better over time. So falling costs, so economies of scale, like I mentioned earlier, the market forces and economic forces have a massive role to play in the role of how successful renewable energy will be in the future. So we've already seen the past few years that because of economies of scale and manufacturing advances and developments in the supply chain, this has pushed costs down significantly. So which has made solar and wind now I think the cheapest form of new electricity generation in many countries. So we know that everything is driven by cost. Yeah, so this cost shift is definitely one of the main drivers behind the more global adoption of solar power. Digitalisation, that's another key development. So this has enabled smart grids, sensors, machine learning for turbine optimization, and automated maintenance has made modern renewables far more reliable. And this is all about forecasting, our ability to forecast and understand how much we actually need, and that we're using it for the energy generated by renewable sources in an efficient way. So forecasting tools can also help balance supply and demand more accurately. Energy storage and grid integration. So because renewables like solar and wind are variable, storage technologies, batteries, pumped hydro, green hydrogen are becoming essential. These systems stabilise the grid, store excess energy, and allow renewables to operate like dispatchable power sources. So another important factor to think about is distributed energy systems. So rooftop solar, community energy hubs, and small-scale wind are shifting generations away from large centralised power plants. So consumers now play a more active role in producing and managing their own energy. So I think this is really important and quite a radical shift in that communities and society feel more empowered to take action and be more energy efficient. And hopefully this does continue. So another area we're going to have a look at is market developments. There have been a lot of market developments which can either be, a positive force or a negative force for the development of renewable energy. So there has been a massive shift in terms of the amount of global investment that we've seen in the past few years. So renewables now do attract more investment than fossil fuels did, which is positive. So at first we may have seen a lot of government funding to attract investment, whereas now the market is doing so well for renewable energy that it's getting that investment from private investment sources as well. So countries are accelerating deployment to meet climate targets, improving energy security and reducing dependence on imports. So countries do want to be more independent. They don't want to have to source energy from abroad. So it makes more sense to invest locally in and be energy efficient. So policy support. So there has been a lot of support from governments using subsidies, tax incentives, feed-in tariffs, and carbon pricing to support adoption. Excuse me. But it has to be said that the market has matured to such a point where renewables no longer need heavy subsidies. So, that's positive news. Corporate demand. So businesses are buying renewable energy directly through long-term contracts. A lot of companies now, have, a lot of policies to be net zero, a lot of road paths. You'll see a lot of policies and strategies and reports from across many different sectors in which they will aim to get to net zero, and there'll be a pathway in place. And a part of that is that's been helpful because then it's meant that these commitments that have been put out there to the world have reshaped the energy market massively. So a positive of renewables. So, there is job creation from a shift into more renewable energy sources is positive. I think there's been a lot of debate around, the green shift may lead to job losses. Well, in fact, we can still have an economy with renewable energy. We can still have jobs. So renewables have become major employers, from manufacturing to installation to maintenance. So, the different kind of the production of the actual machinery, the technology, there's still a manufacturing process involved. So there's still potential for work. So entire supply chains have emerged around solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and hydrogen systems. So this is positive. So another market development is competition with fossil fuels. So with prices falling and climate regulations tightening, renewables increasingly replace fossil fuels in electricity, transport, and heating. Although it has to be said, the shift is structural, not temporary. Okay, so 2.1. So this is learning outcome 2.1. So we're going to now explain the technological trends, market developments, and the physical principles of PV and concentrated solar power. So when we look at solar energy, we've got two very different technologies built on two different physical principles. So there's two types of solar power, and they're based on two completely different but kind of similar types of science. So the PV is photovoltaics, and we've got the CSP, which stands for concentrated solar power. So both of them are similar in that they both harvest sunlight, but they convert it into usable energy in completely different ways. And because the science is different, and is the way in which it's used across different geographical areas is different also. It's, it has to be said that this is why, we do have to be agile and flexible when we look at renewable energy, because we know that geography has a massive role to play in the success of different renewable energy sources. So understanding the physics behind each one will help explain why the global market has leaned heavily towards PV in recent years, even though CSP still has important advantages in certain regions, and it does. So just to further kind of expand upon the idea of how the physical principles of the two different types of solar energy, how they are different, and they do matter. We're going to just kind of delve into a bit more of the detailed science over here now. So the PV works on the photoelectric effect, whereby photons from sunlight hit a semiconductor, and this movement of electrons creates a direct current. Excuse me. So just a simple high-level overview. Sunlight generates a stream of photons. The silicon cells absorb the photons, and the electrons gain energy and move across a junction. And this movement is an electrical current. So this process doesn't involve heat or moving parts. It's a purely electronic reaction, which is why PV systems are silent, scalable, and low maintenance. So the impacts in terms of kind of noise and the environmental impact is quite low. So the efficiency of solar cell depends on the semiconductor structure, the wavelength of the sunlight, and how effectively electrons can move through the material. So in contrast, the other type of solar power is concentrated solar power, CSP. So the science of this is different to PV, and it uses optics and thermodynamics instead of electronics. So with this, the technology is solar panels. With the PV, solar panels will directly convert sunlight into electricity, and it's direct conversion. Whereas with CSP, it uses optics, mirrors, and lenses to concentrate the sunlight onto a receiver to really intensify and maximize the potential of this heat. And that heat then produces steam, which drives a turbine connected to a generator. So the physics behind CSP revolves around reflection and concentration of solar radiation, heat transfer and thermal storage, steam generation, and turbine rotation and electromagnetic induction. So CSP is closer to a traditional power plant because it relies on steam turbines. The difference is that sunlight provides the heat instead of fossil fuels, which is always a bonus. So in terms of the technological trends for these two types of solar power has been quite different. So it's worth noting that for PV, it's grown explosively over the past kind of 10 years for several reasons. So because of the panels and the high rate of efficiency, um, this has meant that the manufacturing costs have fallen. There's been better production processes. The scale and the cheaper materials have made solar panels dramatically cheaper over time. So we know that it's all about how we scale up technology, and if there is, the supply chain there, and when there is that demand, that drives down the costs of materials. So that has driven its kind of success. So we know that there's better inverters and tracking systems, which these improvements have allowed systems to convert more sunlight into usable electricity and maximise output throughout the day. Flexible installation, so PV works at every scale from small rooftops, so it's really versatile, to massive solar farms. So being so versatile is a part of its appeal. Also the life cycle, the kind of lifespan of PV and the panels now commonly last for between 25 to 30 years. So it is a reliable form of renewable energy in many ways. So in contrast, CSP, the trends have been different here for this type of solar power. So the development of this has been much slower and more geographically limited, but still important, and still we should note that it is still important in certain climates, certain regions. So there has been improved thermal storage. So modern CSP plants use molten salt storage, which can hold heat for 6 to 15 hours. So this does allow CSP to deliver power after sunset, something that standalone PV can't do. So that is one positive. Higher temperatures, so new receiver designs allow temperatures above 600 degrees, improving turbine efficiency. So hybridization, so some plants do combine CSP with gas or even PV to smooth output, which is becoming hybrid like that will obviously be helpful to its development, to drive that development. Also, we have the niche deployment. So CSP is advancing mainly in regions with extremely high direct sunlight, like North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of the US. So it is particularly favourable in certain areas, hotter climates. So it has to be said that in terms of market developments, PV does dominate the global market and has become the clear leader in solar energy because of rapid cost reduction. So again, you're seeing the force of economics here being, a major factor in its success. Mass manufacturing in China and other countries. So the scalability is seen as being really helpful. So lower operational complexity. So operationally, it isn't complex. It comes with low kind of risk there. Strong policy support and corporate demand. So there's the policy, the global policy is there, and the corporate demand, and we know that the power of organisations to drive demand is a massive factor. So PV is now one of the cheapest forms of electricity generation worldwide. CSP, in contrast, remains a specialised but even so valuable technology. So CSP has a smaller market share, but its dispatchable power, the ability to produce electricity after sunset, makes it attractive for countries seeking firm renewable power. So in countries with hotter climates, we see that this is the preferred option. So geography counts again. So markets where CSP still sees investment includes from Morocco, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Chile, and the American Southwest. However, CSP plants require large land areas, very high direct sunlight, high capital investment, skilled operation. So operationally, they are complex to run and operate. So because of these barriers, CSP grows more slowly and in fewer countries. It's quite a specialised technology, renewable technology. So just to summarise, PV converts sunlight directly into electricity using semiconductor physics. In contrast, CSP converts sunlight into heat, then uses thermodynamic processes to generate power. So again, just to emphasise, PV dominates the global market due to falling costs, simple deployment and high innovation rates. CSP remains valuable for regions with intense sunlight and for systems that need built-in thermal storage and evening generation. So 2.2, we're going to go on to this learning outcome. So this will be similar, but we're now going to focus on a different renewable energy, which is onshore and offshore wind harvesting. Again, we're going to look at the technological trends, market developments, and physical principles of this type of energy. So wind energy is built on a simple physical principle. So moving air contains kinetic energy, and a turbine converts that kinetic energy into mechanical rotation, in which a generator then converts into electricity. So onshore and offshore wind follow the same physics, but the engineering, scale, and market behaviour are very different. So it's just worth noting there. So the same science, but there are different factors that have meant it's been taken on quite differently throughout the world. So I'll briefly go over the physical principles of wind harvesting. So wind forms because the sun heats the earth unevenly. Warm air rises, cool air sinks, and pressure differences create airflow. The stronger the pressure gradient, the stronger the wind. So a wind turbine captures this energy using its blades. The wind hits the blades, which are shaped like aircraft wings, which is why I absolutely love the sight of wind turbines. I've got to say I find them quite beautiful in the distance. There's just something about them. I think they're quite magical. So yeah. So the wind hits the blades, which are shaped like aircraft wings. That will then lift and drag forces, causing the rotor to spin. So it's this rotation that drives a shaft that's connected to a generator, and the generator uses electromagnetic induction to produce the electricity. So there's a few different things at play, which means the energy output depends on air density, blade area, and wind speed. Because power increases in the cube of wind speed, even small increases in wind make a big difference. So that's why offshore sites where winds are stronger, so you'll often see on the sea. I think when I leave, kind of head towards Wales from England, you'll see on the coastline, there's a lot of wind turbines there. So it is very windy there, so we can see why it has been so a popular area geographically. So offshore sites where winds are stronger and steadier produce far more energy, so they have been really popular sites. So in terms of technological trends, onshore wind trends. So onshore wind has become mature and highly standardised. Taller towers and longer blades allow turbines to reach steadier, higher altitude winds, boosting output. So yeah, I think it's worth to really kind of stress that the turbines have grown significantly, which, you know, the technology has changed, enabling better kind of energy outputs because of that. So better materials and aerodynamics reduce maintenance needs and improve performance in low wind areas. So, you know, better technology here. So Sensor-driven optimization, so this thing again about technology, better technology, has enabled turbines to run more efficiently as time's gone on. So the modular construction makes installation faster and cheaper. So the labour costs are cheaper, which has been helpful. So because onshore is simpler, most innovation focuses on squeezing more efficiency out of the existing design. So offshore wind trends. So offshore wind is where the biggest leap in technology is happening. So there's been, a lot of change in terms of the technology here. So we found that over the past few years that very large turbines have now come into play. So offshore machines can now reach to 12 to 18 MW with 100-metre blades. So it means that bigger turbines mean fewer installed units, which means it's a lower cost. So floating turbines are emerging, allowing wind farms in much deeper waters where winds are strongest. Advanced foundations. So the foundations have got better, which has improved the stability and the ease of installation. The grid and transmission upgrades including HVDC technology, which has enabled long-distance export of offshore power, and improved installation vessels and robotics reduce labour intensity. So again, this thing around technology has made it a more favourable form of renewable energy and a more popular form. So offshore does remain the cutting edge of wind engineering. And I'd say it's probably the most popular form, the biggest source of renewable energy in the UK right now. So onshore, the market developments here have been, onshore is one of the cheapest renewable technologies worldwide. So key market dynamics have included falling costs driven by this thing around economies of scale and standardisation. So the economy and kind of the technology has become bigger. So that has meant that the supply and demand has meant that there's falling costs. The increasing land use and planning constraints in some regions, which slow new projects. So in terms of planning constraints, there's been obviously there has been planning objections from local communities. Some local communities feel that the impact is quite big, and they don't want a wind power unit anywhere near their house because it can interfere with TV, with radio. So also, the noise has not been favoured by local communities either, and the impact on the environmental impacts on local species, biodiversity. So also worth to highlight that growing hybrid systems where offshore wind is now being paired with solar or batteries to stabilise output. So it's a stable, mature market, but faces political and local acceptance barriers in some countries. So I guess where it is a particularly an area with that is maybe populated with local people, they are going to have issues with this. So that's kind of a human factor to think about there in terms of barriers. So offshore wind market. So offshore wind market is expanding rapidly because it offers such a large scale, high output, predictable form of energy. So there's been the key market trends have included huge investment growth in Europe, China, and the US. Government-backed auction systems that guarantee revenue and lower financing risks. So people are more willing to invest in this type of in offshore. So there has been rapid cost reductions, especially in Europe. the cost of offshore wind has fallen dramatically in the last decade. So there's been obviously this drive from organisations to align their policy to net zero targets, which has increased massively over the last 10 years, has meant there's been more corporate power purchase agreements. So from companies seeking large volumes of clean technology. So this has worked well. So again, you're seeing the power of kind of market forces there. So offshore is becoming a central part of national energy strategies because it delivers gigawatt scale power and can replace fossil fuel generation more directly. So it is good news. So to summarise, onshore and offshore wind rely on the same aerodynamic and electromagnetic principles, but offshore delivers stronger and more consistent winds, leading to much higher energy output. So the technology innovation is driving bigger turbines, smarter controls and new foundation designs, while market growth is propelled by falling cost, strong policy support and increasing demand for large-scale clean energy. So you can see there the different kind of factors that have really seen offshore wind take off. So for 2.3, we're now going to look at hydroelectric power plants and wave and tidal energy harvesting. So again, we're going to look at the technological trends, market developments and physical principles. So hydropower, wave energy and tidal energy all rely on the basic physics of moving water, but each technology converts that motion into electricity in a very different way. So they're all similar in the actual kind of the science of how water moves, but the way in which that energy is converted to produce electricity is different. So hydropower is mature and widely deployed, while wave and tidal systems are younger, more experimental and still moving through commercialisation. So they aren't quite there yet. So they don't quite have, hydropower doesn't quite have the economies of scale. So the physical principles. So hydroelectric power. So I'm just going to briefly go over the science of hydroelectric power and the other different types of power there. So we've got hydropower works on a simple principle. Gravity gives water potential energy when it's stored at height. When that water flows downward through a turbine, you get the energy, potential energy that converts into kinetic energy. So this moving water spins wind turbines, and the wind turbine shaft drives a generator. So electromagnetic induction creates electricity. So the greater the height difference, the head, and the stronger the flow, the more power is produced. So the physics is straightforward and highly efficient, which is why hydro remains one of the most reliable renewable sources. So there are three main different types of forms of hydroelectric power. So we have reservoir dam systems, which store water and release it on demand. And we've got runoff river systems. So this is using natural river flow without large storage, and pumped storage systems. So pump water uphill. They pump water uphill, when electricity is cheap, and release it when demand rises. So wave energy in contrast. So wave power is based on the transfer of wind energy into ocean waves. So wave carry massive amounts of kinetic and potential energy as their crests rise and fall. Okay, so the wave devices convert this motion in different ways. So the oscillating water columns push air through a turbine. Floating devices bend or pivot in wave movement, driving hydraulic systems. So the physics is all about capturing the up and down or back and forth moving and converting it into mechanical rotation. So that's the kind of the under physical kind of principles of it there. And then tidal energy is the most predictable renewable source because it relies on gravitational forces from the moon and the sun. Tides create strong, regular currents as water moves in and out. So in terms of the technological trends, so hydropower is mature, so it does tend to focus on improvement that rather than invention. So for now, it's seen that the technology is where it needs to be. Um, it's more about kind of the efficiency and the modernisation um, of dams, etc. So I think there's this kind of also this thing around biodiversity. So they want to have they want to improve the turbines to make them fish friendly, so that sea like aquatic passage is safe, because obviously with any kind of type of renewable energy there will be an impact on nature, and obviously we do want to protect biodiversity, so it is important there. So digital monitoring that tracks flow, performance and structural integrity. So there has been a focus on the digital monitoring there, an expansion of pumped storage systems to support solar and wind variability. So there's that kind of connection to other renewable energy there. Hydropower is no longer just about large dams, flexibility and grid support. Now drive innovation. Wave energy trends. So the wave technology is still developing. We're looking at better materials to withstand corrosion and extreme storms. We need more robust anchoring and mooring designs, more modular scalable devices, allowing for easier maintenance, so modular, movable, more accessible, I guess, operationally, more viable. So hybrid systems, pairing wave devices with offshore wind farms to share infrastructure. To this thing about being hybrid and kind of sharing the best bits of each type of form of energy generation. So there have been AI-driven control strategies to optimize movement and power output. So we've got tidal energy trends. So tidal systems are advancing steadily. So there have been larger, more efficient underwater turbines with designs similar to wind turbines. So there are floating tidal platforms making maintenance easier by keeping turbines accessible. So improved corrosion resistant materials. And yeah, so the lower cost fabrication through modular turbine design. So being modular allows it to be kind of more flexible, therefore reducing the cost. So tidal power is moving from experimental devices to multi-megawatt farms. Okay, so in terms of market developments that are impacting hydropower, wave energy, and tidal energy, it's quite different, and different across the globe in different areas. So hydropower is already one of the world's biggest renewable sources. There's been strong adoption in Asia, South America, Canada, and Scandinavia recently. There's been growing investment in pumped hydro because it stabilises the grid with high levels of solar and wind. So new projects focus on upgrades rather than new mega dams due to environmental concerns. Okay. So hydropower provides long-term dispatchable power, which keeps it central to energy planning. So it's very favourable form of energy generation, sorry. So for wave energy markets, wave energy is emerging but not fully commercial yet. So governments in the UK, Portugal, Australia and the US are currently funding pilot projects. Private investment is growing but still cautious due to high costs and engineering challenges. So it's been restricted. So this thing around kind of relying on market forces to invest to see its development has been restricted because of the costs and engineering challenges. So until this changes, it's kind of like a back and forth, kind of stuck in this situation. So interest is strongest in island nations and coastal regions where wave resources are abundant. So again, this thing around, it being the geography and the location of certain types of renewable technologies are really important here. So tidal energy markets. So tidal energy sits between wave and hydro in terms of maturity. So the UK, Canada, France and South Korea lead in deployment. So investors value tidal's extreme predictability, something few renewables can match. So it's extreme. It's in terms of like planning. This is a favoured type of energy generation because you can kind of plan and know how much energy you're going to get, which is helpful because it allows us to be more energy efficient. So costs are falling as turbine designs standardise, and large tidal lagoon projects are under review in the UK and elsewhere. So in summary, hydroelectric power is a mature, efficient and widely deployed technology based on gravitational potential energy. Wave and tidal energy rely on the physics of ocean motion waves from wind, tides, from lunar gravity, and are moving from experimental systems to commercial reality. Market trends show hydro as a staple backbone of renewable energy, while wave and tidal are the next generation of clean power with growing technological sophistication and early commercial uptake. So we see that the kind of the success of every form of renewable energy is dependent on so many different factors. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the environmental impacts of onshore and offshore wind, hydroelectric plants, and wave and tidal energy harvesting. So every renewable energy technology isn't without an environmental impact. So obviously they are far less than the use of fossil fuels, but they do affect landscapes, ecosystems, and local communities in very different ways. So when countries or different governments, organisations are thinking about moving or looking at different forms of renewable energy, they don't go without another kind of environmental impact. It does become a bit of a trade-off, and this is where you kind of then can look at analysing and comparing and contrasting the life cycle analysis, using life cycle analysis to look at different forms of renewable energy. So in order to analyse these impacts and compare different types of renewable energy to make sure it's most kind of sustainable, we can use a methodology called life cycle analysis, which looks at the full life cycle. So land use, construction, operation, wildlife interaction, and end of life issues. So from the actual manufacturing of the technology, the supply chain, any kind of interactions with local wildlife. And so I'm going to shut this window, it's quite cold. Sorry about that. Okay, so in terms of the environmental impacts for onshore and offshore, so we've got the positive impacts for onshore. So in terms of environmental impact, it is a really quite low it's quite low in terms of emissions. So once installed, the turbines generate electricity with almost no greenhouse gas emissions, which is great. It does have a small physical footprint, so turbines use a small land area at the base, allowing agricultural grazing to continue around them. So faster carbon payback time. So most turbines offset the manufacturing carbon within months. So that's the electricity, the greenhouse gases that are used and generated during their manufacturing will be kind of offset within a few months. So that's handy to know. So some negative impacts. So I'm just going to zoom in here. So we have landscape and visual changes. The turbines are tall and can dominate rural landscapes. I mean, I've mentioned earlier, I think they are quite beautiful, but obviously I don't live near one directly. So if you're in a local area, it's important to understand the local community. Every community may react differently to this form of technology. The noise and shadow flicker, so the turbine rotation can affect nearby households if poorly sited. Bird and bat mortality, collisions can occur, especially in migration corridors, although modern radar and sighting rules reduce this. So there is a way around that, but we don't want to be kind of affecting nature and destroying any kind of animal there. So road construction, so the building foundations, access roads and transmission lines disrupt soil and habitat. So there's that consideration as well. So overall, onshore wind has climate benefits but requires careful siting to minimise wildlife and community impacts. Okay, so then in contrast we have offshore wind. So the environmental impacts, so is quite positive here. So you have high energy output with very low emissions, reduced visual impact for most residents when sited offshore, and lower collision risks for many land-based species. But I guess, there are going to be water-based species, so then there's going to be an impact for those. So I guess it's all about when we think about different types of renewable energy, it's going to be a trade-off. And I guess it's just around really kind of it does then come to using judgment, like which species do we want to protect more than another. It can come to kind of some difficult questions, so just to be aware of. So negative impacts, marine disturbances during construction. So pile driving creates underwater noise that affects fish and marine mammals. Habitat changes on the seabed. Foundations alter sediment and can disturb the ecosystems. Sea life is very important for us. We need biodiversity. We need our seas, and obviously the sea does store carbon as well, and some of the plant life will be part of that. So you've got bird migration impacts. Offshore locations can still intersect with flight paths. Overall, offshore wind delivers large-scale clean energy but needs strict monitoring of marine ecosystems and noise mitigation during construction. So all of these different technologies come with different impacts. And there we have hydroelectric plants. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. But again, you've got one positive impact, which I think is fantastic. It does have a long lifespan, so dams operate for between 50 and 100 years. And they do have a very low operational emissions there. Negative impacts, so again, the thing around habitat disruption, reservoirs flood large areas, replacing communities, wildlife and forests. So again, there's that impact on local ecosystem. But hydropower is clean at the point of generation, but its ecological footprint is significant, especially for large dams. So in terms of greenhouse gases, it may be quite low, but in terms of its ecological footprint, it's quite a big, and that is a really difficult trade-off again. So modern projects focus on runoff river or pumped storage systems to reduce impacts. So wave energy, environmental impacts. The one positive impact will be low visual impact. So device sits on or under the water surface and barely noticeable from land. So in terms of kind of the human social impact, it's not disruptive to local communities. A negative impact, again, this disturbance marine life, noise, vibration, moving parts can interfere with marine animals and fish. Sea life, again, the seas are really important to us, and biodiversity within sea life is important too. So overall, wave energy is relatively gentle on the environment, but it needs careful marine planning to avoid harming sensitive species. Tidal energy. So again, an environmental impact. A positive is extremely predictable generation supporting grid stability. So in terms of planning for long-term planning, it does support the grid stability. We know how much we're going to get, and therefore can plan, which makes it very favourable. So low operational emissions and long equipment life. A negative impact, I'm just going to go over one here. Again, this underwater noise and vibration affecting species sensitive to sound, so dolphins, seals and fish. So again, there is a risk to marine life, which is, again, a difficult thing to have to consider. So overall, tidal energy has strong climate benefits, but needs strict ecological assessments, especially around migratory routes and sensitive marine ecosystems. So when we look at, where we place tidal energy, it's important to do an ecological impact assessment. So you've got kind of awareness of the local kind of nature systems and what the species are around the area, to then put a plan to protect them in place. So to summarise, we've got onshore wind, low emissions but visible in the landscape and affect birds and bats. Offshore wind, high output but impacts marine noise, seabed habitats and bird routes. Hydropower, very reliable but the most ecologically disruptive when large dams are involved. Wave energy, low carbon but low visual impact with manageable marine impacts. Tidal energy, predictable and clean but must be placed carefully to avoid disturbing marine life and tidal dynamics. So again, wave energy is looking like the most effective here, preferred, should I say. So the next section is all around geothermal energy. Again, we'll look at the physical principles and contemporary technological trends. So geothermal energy works because the Earth stores massive amounts of heat beneath the surface. So this heat comes from two sources: residual heat from the planet's formation and ongoing radioactive decay in the Earth's crust and mantle. So the closer we get to the Earth's core, the hotter it gets. So geothermal technology works in a way that it taps into this natural temperature gradient and converts the heat into usable energy for electricity, heating or industrial processes. So the physical principles of geothermal energy are, so the way that in which it works is that heat always moves from hotter areas to cooler areas. So when it comes to geothermal systems, the Earth's natural heat flows upwards. So by drilling wells into hot rock or underground reservoirs, we can extract this heat through conduction and convection. So hydrothermal systems, traditionally, geothermal plants rely on underground reservoirs where heat, water, all exist together, and this physics is straightforward. And the hot water or steam rises to the surface through wells. The steam drives a turbine which powers a generator. Cooled water is pumped back underground to maintain the reservoir, and these systems use the same thermodynamic cycle as fossil fuel power plants, but the heat source is natural, which is great. So we have seen, especially across the UK, the rise of heat pumps. So for heating and cooling buildings, geothermal heat pumps, ground source heat pumps take advantage of stable temperatures just a few metres below the surface. They operate on the vapour compression cycle, moving heat rather than generating it. In winter, they extract heat from the ground. In summer, they reject the heat back into it. So these have become really quite popular. Which leads on to this next section around technological trends. So we have seen the rise. Enhanced geothermal systems has been the most significant technological breakthrough in the sector. It allows geothermal development in regions without natural reservoirs. So that's worth being aware of. And then it goes into the science a little bit on here. I am running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly go through the main areas so then you can have a read back over this. So you've got low temperature geothermal. So this has become really popular for domestic settings across the UK at the moment. So it uses heat pumps to boost efficiency in marginal temperature zones. So this reduces our reliance in urban areas of natural gas, and there's been a massive drive of this at the moment. I have come across anyway. And we have geothermal for industrial heat. So high temperature geothermal resources are being explored for industrial uses, especially for food processing, greenhouse heating. And then we have micro geothermal systems. So small modular geothermal systems are emerging from remote communities, mining operations and islands. They use compact turbines and modular drilling, reducing installation time. So just to summarise, geothermal, I know we went quickly over that, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid. So geothermal energy is rooted in simple physics. Heat from the Earth's interior flows upwards and can be captured for electricity or heat. Modern technologies, especially deeper drilling, closed loop systems, and enhanced geothermal fracturing, are expanding geothermal's reach beyond traditional hotspots. So combined with hybrid systems, district heating, industrial applications, geothermal energy is evolving from a niche power source into a versatile, scalable contributor to low carbon energy systems. So now we're going to talk around kind of like how it's important to evaluate. So this is learning outcome 2.6. It's really important to evaluate how natural settings of any kind of given country or region, so the geography, how it maybe can support or hinder the use and development of renewable energy. So when we do kind of look at a country's potential for renewable energy, it's important to look at its natural settings first. So its geography, climate, geology and coastline shape what technologies make sense and which ones will struggle. So yeah, this is kind of a good way to kind of assess and explore which renewable energy would be best in certain areas, dependent upon those different factors. So no country is strong in everything. So it's important that each country can do better or not as good in different types of renewable energy. So most have clear natural advantages in some renewables and barriers in others. Understanding the physical restraints conditions can help us explain why national energy strategies do differ and why certain technologies scale faster in some regions than others. So there is this thing around, we have this global agreement around what reductions we need in greenhouse gases. There is general consensus there for what the science is, and validated by the IPCC. But there is going to be a different strategy per different region and different area across the world. So it's just important to understand how that's impacted how some technologies have really grown in scale. So below is an analytical breakdown you can apply to any country, followed by real-world examples to show how these natural factors play out. So I'm not going to read out all of this, but this is really helpful and will be available in Moodle. So this kind of goes into the different natural settings. This is really helpful. So you've got solar energy supported or limited by climate and radiation levels. So this just outlines the kind of perfect conditions where which renewable energy works well in different areas, and how does the climate impact? How does it support, or how does it act as a barrier to that type of technology? You've got geothermal energy there as well, dependent on geology. Biomass. So there's all different, they're completely different in terms of the geography does limit them, and the natural settings can limit or drive their development. So overall evaluation, a country's natural environment either strengthens or limits renewable energy technologies. Strong sun supports solar, strong wind supports turbines, mountains and rivers support hydro, active geology supports geothermal, power tides support tidal farms. Regions without these conditions must lean on imports, efficiency, and alternative energy technologies. So, in simple terms, a high level overview, renewable energy development is always grounded in the physical geography. So, it's always limited or always kind of, it can be, a positive in the development, in its development. And then you have your policy second. So natural conditions determine what is possible, technology and economics determine what is practical. So there are 5 key factors that we need to kind of think about. So you've got your natural conditions, the technological forces, and economic forces as well. Okay, so we're going to come to the end now. So there are all the references if you want to check any of those out. And then if you want to refer to any ebooks and journals on the Moodle for this unit, any further reading will be on there. If you have any questions, please kindly email learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk. And just a heads up, the submission of the assignment to be sent to the same email address there, and is to be submitted 2 weeks of the completion of all the units and their delivery. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.